The moment she walked through my door, my heart stopped. Same eyes, same smile, same laugh I once had when the world was still kind. My son said it was just coincidence, that his fiancée simply reminded him of me when I was young. But I knew better. The way she stirred her tea, the way she tilted her head when she listened, those weren't habits, those were memories, mine. So I hired someone to dig into her past, and when the report came back, I dropped my cup and couldn't breathe. Because the girl my son was about to marry wasn't just his fiancée. She was my daughter, and the man who made that possible was the same one who once called me his wife. The first time I saw her, my knees nearly buckled. My son, Daniel, walked through the front door with his arm around a young woman I could have sworn was me, 30 years younger. Same hazel eyes that flickered gold under sunlight, same brown hair, thick and gently curled at the ends. Even the tiny scar above her left brow, the one I'd gotten falling off my bike at 13, was there, faint but identical. For a heartbeat, I thought I was looking at a ghost. She smiled with a warmth that was almost rehearsed and extended her hand. "Hi, Mrs. Parker. I'm Clara." Mrs. Parker. It had been years since anyone called me that. My ex-husband's name, the one I'd buried under silence and wine glasses long ago, suddenly felt sharp again. I forced a polite smile and shook her hand, but every nerve in my body was vibrating. Her skin was cool. Her perfume, vanilla and jasmine, was the same one I wore in my 20s. Daniel's voice broke through my fog. "Mom, isn't she something? We met at an art exhibit downtown. I told her she had your kindness." Your kindness. My throat tightened. The last time a man told me I was kind, he walked out 3 weeks later with a 25-year-old secretary. I managed a laugh. "She's lovely, Daniel." We moved to the dining room. The table was set for 3, but suddenly it felt like I was hosting a memory of myself. Clara sat across from me, back straight, hands folded neatly, smiling at Daniel the way I once smiled at his father. When she spoke, her gestures mirrored mine so precisely that it made me dizzy. The same way of tucking hair behind her ear when she laughed, the same way of pausing mid-sentence before making a point. Halfway through dinner, she looked at me and said softly, "I feel like we've met before." The fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. Daniel chuckled. "Maybe Mom just reminds you of someone from college." But Clara wasn't looking at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on me, curious, almost searching. After they left that night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and went straight to the hallway mirror. I stood there studying my own face, the faint wrinkles, the softened edges, and saw her reflection overlapping mine. It wasn't just resemblance, it was replication. Ours all elms. The next morning, I couldn't shake it. I rummaged through old photo albums, ones Daniel hadn't seen since childhood. In every picture from my 20s, me laughing at the lake, me in the kitchen with flour on my cheeks, me with my arm around my late husband, it was her, Clara, or me as Clara. I felt a rush of nausea. The resemblance wasn't casual. It was exact down to the smallest freckle. All day, I tried to reason it away. Coincidence, genetics, tricks of memory. But then the universe started mocking me. At the grocery store, I caught sight of her at the end of the aisle, picking the same brand of coffee I always buy, the one Daniel hates. When she turned, she smiled and waved. "Mrs. Parker, small world." My hands trembled so hard I dropped the basket. "Do you live nearby?" I asked, trying to sound normal. "Just moved in last week," she said cheerfully. "Funny, my apartment used to belong to someone named Evelyn, too." My blood ran cold. "That's my name," I whispered. She blinked, startled. "Oh, wow, what are the odds?" That night, Daniel called. "Mom, don't freak out, but Clara mentioned you seemed a little, uncomfortable." "I'm fine," I lied. He sighed. "You're just not used to me bringing someone home. I get it. But Mom, she's amazing. She makes me feel like I've known her my whole life." I gripped the phone until my knuckles whitened. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of," I murmured. He laughed, thinking I was joking. "You'll love her once you get to know her." But I already knew her. Every smile, every inflection, every tilt of her head belonged to someone I'd already been. Sleep became impossible. I started waking at odd hours, heart racing, certain someone had been in the house. My dreams were strange. Clara standing at the foot of my bed, whispering, "You took my life." I'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, only to find the hallway light flickering on and off, though no one had touched the switch. By the fourth night, I found myself sitting in the dark with my old journals scattered around me. I flipped through the entries from my 20s, desperate for something, anything that might explain this feeling. That's when I noticed something I'd never paid attention to. A missing volume. The journal from the year Daniel was born. I'd written faithfully every year since I was 16, but that one, gone. A small hole in a perfect line of memory. The next morning, I drove to my sister's place across town. She was the only one who knew me before the marriage started falling apart. When I told her about Clara, she frowned. "She looks like you? Exactly like me." She hesitated. "Evelyn, there's something I never told you. When you had Daniel, you were in the hospital longer than they said. Mom told me they'd kept you under sedation for 2 days because of complications. But when I asked the doctor, he said you were stable after 6 hours." I felt the room spin. Why didn't anyone tell me this? "Because your husband told us not to," she said quietly. "He said you needed rest." Her words clung to me like smoke all the way home. That night, Daniel and Clara came over again. Clara brought dessert, a pie perfectly baked, the same recipe I used to make when Daniel was 10. "How did you know this was his favorite?" I asked. She smiled innocently. "He mentioned it once." No, he hadn't. I cut the pie, forced a smile, and watched her eat, my own appetite gone. Later, when they left, I stared at the empty plates. My reflection in the silverware warped and unfamiliar. Something deep inside me whispered, "This isn't a coincidence." And for the first time in years, I was truly afraid of my own past. I tried convincing myself that I was imagining things, that grief over a marriage long dead was warping my mind. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, my own face, smiling back at me across that dinner table. For the next few days, I went through the motions of normal life, grocery shopping, answering Daniel's texts, pretending that I didn't feel watched, but I did. Someone had been inside my head, or worse, inside my memories. On Thursday morning, I found a letter wedged in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a black and white baby picture, old and slightly torn at the edges. Scrawled on the back were the words, "You were never supposed to know." My hands shook so hard I dropped it. The baby in the photo had my chin, my curls, and on the hospital tag tied around her wrist was the name Clara. I don't remember breathing for a full minute. When Daniel called that night, I could barely answer. He sounded cheerful, in love. "Mom, we're thinking of moving in together. Clara found a nice apartment near the lake." The same lake where I'd met his father. I gripped the phone tighter. "That's quick, don't you think?" He laughed. "When you know, you know." After we hung up, I sat in the dark for hours, staring at that photo. I'd given birth once. At 26, complications, they said. The memory was foggy, fragments blurred by morphine. I remembered the nurses whispering, the smell of antiseptic, my husband's hand on my forehead. Then nothing. 2 days gone, stolen from my memory like someone had cut them out with scissors. What if I hadn't had one child? What if there'd been another, one I was never told about? That night, I couldn't bear to sleep in my room. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, the photo burning a hole through my thoughts. Around 2 in the morning, headlights swept across the window. I peeked through the curtain. Daniel's car. He got out laughing, arm around Clara. They didn't see me watching as they paused by the porch. She leaned in close, her face half lit by the moon, and whispered something that made him grin, but her eyes flicked up toward the window, straight at me. For a split second, the smile dropped. Her expression hardened, cold and deliberate, before she turned away. That wasn't coincidence. That was acknowledgement. The next day, I went to the hospital where I'd given birth 32 years ago. The building had been renovated, but the records department still smelled of old paper and bleach. I told the receptionist I was looking for delivery records from 1993. She smiled politely, disappeared, and returned with a clipboard. "We keep those in archives. You'll need authorization from the attending physician or family. My doctor retired years ago." "Then I'm afraid—" "Please," I cut in, voice trembling. "It's important. My name is Evelyn Parker. The attending was Dr. Wallace." She hesitated, then sighed. "Wait here." 15 minutes later, she returned with a single thin file. Most of it was blank, pages removed or redacted, but one note stood out at the bottom. "Patient under sedation. Recovery delayed by obstetric complication. Infant transferred to nursery A. Twin B still under observation. Twin." For a long moment, I couldn't move. Twin B, 2 babies. But I'd left that hospital with only one. I stumbled out to my car, clutching the file, my mind spiraling. Why had no one told me? Why had my husband lied? I drove without direction until I found myself parked outside Daniel's new apartment building. Through the glass doors, I could see Clara decorating the lobby bulletin board with paper hearts. She laughed with the building manager, then looked out the window and met my eyes again, as if she'd been expecting me. That evening, Daniel called. "Mom, Clara said she saw you today. Are you following her?" "I was at the hospital," I said quietly. "Daniel, there's something you don't know." He groaned. "Mom, please don't start this again. She's not who you think she is," I snapped. "There are things about your birth I never knew, about your father, about another baby." "Stop!" His voice cracked. "You're letting the past eat you alive. Clara's not part of whatever nightmare you're building in your head." He hung up before I could answer. I sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, shaking. The house felt like a mausoleum, every shadow whispering something I couldn't quite hear. On the counter, the photograph lay beside my empty glass. "You were never supposed to know." I whispered to the dark, "Well, I do now." That night, I found the number of a private investigator online, a man named Stephen Callahan. The reviews said he handled sensitive domestic matters. I didn't even hesitate. When he picked up, his voice was low, steady. "Stephen Callahan Investigations." "I think my son's fiancée is my daughter," I said. There was a pause. Then quietly, "Tell me everything." Stephen's office sat above a pawn shop that smelled of rust and cheap cologne. The blinds were half drawn, letting in a slice of gray daylight that cut across his desk. He was older than I'd expected. Gray at the temples, steady eyes, a man who looked like he'd already seen the worst parts of other people's lives. I slid the photo across the desk. "I need to know who she really is." He studied it for a long moment. "Your son's fiancée?" "Yes. Her name's Clara, but she's not who she says she is." He didn't flinch. "You think she's related to you?" "I know she is." He nodded once, pulled out a notepad. "Do you have her last name?" I did. Clara Doyle. He wrote it down, tapped his pen against the table. "Give me a week, maybe less." When I left his office, the clouds had turned the sky into a bruise. I walked the streets in a daze, memories bleeding into every reflection. Shop windows, car doors, puddles. All of them held 2 versions of me, one older, hardened, and one young, smiling back from somewhere I couldn't reach. The next days crawled by. Daniel stopped answering my calls, and when he did, it was clipped. "Mom, please don't scare her. She's worried you're unwell." Unwell. The word lodged in my throat like glass. I'd spent my entire adult life holding things together. After the divorce, after the sleepless years, after the betrayals. And now my own son thought I'd lost my mind. On Saturday evening, I caught myself driving past their building again. The window to Daniel's apartment was open, music floating out. Something soft, jazzy. Through the glass, I saw Clara moving around the kitchen, hair tied up, wearing Daniel's old college sweatshirt. Mine once. I'd folded it into his suitcase when he left for university. She turned and for one heart-stopping instant looked straight at me through the glass. I ducked instinctively, heart pounding. When I looked up again, she'd closed the curtains. By Monday morning, I was running on coffee and paranoia. I almost didn't answer when Stephen called. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "we need to meet." He sounded careful. That tone investigators use when they already know the truth and are trying to figure out how to say it. We met in a quiet cafe near the river, the same cafe my husband and I used to visit when we still believed in forever. Stephen slid a manila envelope across the table. Everything I could find on Clara Doyle. Birth records, education, family background. You were right. Something doesn't line up. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of documents, a birth certificate from a small hospital 3 towns over, adoption papers, sealed court records. The birth mother's name was blacked out until I tilted the page under the light. Someone had tried to erase the ink, but faintly, just faintly, you could still read it. Evelyn P. My hand flew to my mouth. Stephen's voice was steady. She was adopted 2 days after delivery. The attending physician listed matches your old obstetrician. I stared at the page, my own name staring back from 30 years ago. My lost time, my missing journal, my husband's insistence that I rest. "There's more," Stephen said quietly. Her adoptive parents died in a car accident when she was 19. Since then, her records are scattered. Changed addresses, changed jobs, almost like someone grooming her to stay invisible. I looked up, barely breathing. "Someone?" He hesitated. Her legal guardian for a few years after the accident was a Mr. Douglas Parker. My ex-husband. The room spun. Stephen kept talking, but the words blurred into noise. I saw flashes of Douglas's smile, the way he'd touched my shoulder after I gave birth, saying I'd done beautifully. I remembered how he'd handled all the hospital paperwork while I drifted in and out of sedation. "Are you saying he kept one of the babies?" Stephen leaned forward. "I can't confirm motive yet, but the paper trail points to him arranging the adoption personally." I gripped the table. "And now she's engaged to your son, yes." For a moment, the cafe disappeared. I could hear only my own heartbeat, hard and furious. The air felt thick, like I was drowning in it. Stephen's voice cut through. "I can get DNA confirmation if you want," quietly. I nodded, tears burning hot in my eyes. "Do it." He folded his hands. "This is delicate. If she's truly your daughter, she might not know. Whatever's happening, she's a victim too." But all I could think was of Daniel, my sweet, stubborn boy, falling in love with a girl who shared his blood. That night, I couldn't bring myself to call him. I sat on the porch instead, clutching the envelope against my chest while the wind howled through the trees. I kept thinking of the moment Clara had first looked at me, the flicker of recognition in her eyes. Maybe she didn't know what it meant, but something inside her did. The past was crawling back, wearing my face, calling me mother without knowing why. And as I watched the lights in Daniel's apartment flicker on across the lake, I whispered the truth to the night. He didn't just take my husband, he took my child. I barely slept that night. The wind moaned against the windows, and every sound in the house felt like a warning. The tick of the clock, the faint creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator. I kept replaying Stephen's words until they turned poisonous in my mind. Her legal guardian was your ex-husband. Douglas had always been charming in that polite, controlled way that made people trust him. I'd trusted him, too, even when I shouldn't have. I remembered the way he'd held my hand after the birth, whispering, "Don't worry, Evelyn. Everything's fine." He'd said it with such certainty that I believed him. I never thought to ask what fine really meant. Now I knew. The next morning, I went to the attic. Dust coated everything. The boxes of Daniel's toys, the old Christmas ornaments, a chest full of forgotten paperwork. I dug through it until I found a folder labeled Medical Records, 1993. Inside were bills from the hospital, insurance forms, and one thin envelope sealed with tape yellowed by time. It was addressed to Douglas Parker Confidential. My stomach turned. I peeled the tape slowly, like disarming a bomb. Inside was a short letter on hospital stationery. "Following your request, the second infant has been transferred to Nursery B for adoption arrangement. Documentation sealed as per instruction." The signature was Dr. Wallace, the same man who'd delivered my children. For a long time, I couldn't breathe. My knees gave out, and I sat on the attic floor surrounded by the ghosts of a life I hadn't known I'd lived. Douglas had orchestrated everything. He'd stolen one of our twins, our daughter, and arranged her adoption in secret. And now, decades later, she'd come back into our lives, wearing my face, unknowingly falling in love with her own brother. I called Stephen. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. "I found proof," I whispered. "A letter from the hospital." He was silent for a moment. "Bring it to me. And Evelyn, don't confront them yet. Not until we have the DNA results." But waiting was unbearable. That evening, I stood at my kitchen window watching the sun bleed into the lake. Across the water, lights flickered in Daniel's apartment. I could see two silhouettes moving, laughing, embracing. My children, I thought. Both of them. And they didn't even know. I pressed my forehead against the glass and cried for the years I'd lost, for the daughter I'd never held, for the son who would hate me when he learned the truth. The next day, I went to see my sister again. She listened in stunned silence as I told her everything. Douglas's lie, the adoption, Clara. "He always had secrets," she murmured. "Remember how he used to make those business trips? Maybe this was one of them." I nodded weakly. He destroyed everything good in our lives and still managed to look like the hero. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." My voice cracked. "If I tell Daniel now, he'll never believe me without proof. But if I wait, they could—" I couldn't even finish the thought. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Then you need that proof fast." That night, Stephen called again. "Evelyn, we got the results." I gripped the phone tighter. "And? It's a 99.8% match. She's your daughter." The world tilted. I had expected it, feared it, but hearing it aloud still gutted me. "Stephen," continued, "I traced the paper trail further. Douglas signed the adoption consent under your name. He forged your signature. The adoption agency he used was dissolved a year later, probably to cover his tracks." I stared at the floor, my heart hammering. He must have thought he could erase it forever. Maybe he thought you'd never find out. But why now? Why her? Why Daniel? "I don't think she knows," Stephen said gently. "To her, this is coincidence. Fate, maybe. She doesn't understand she's been walking straight back into the life she was stolen from." I covered my mouth to keep from sobbing. "She deserves to know. They both do." "I agree, but not tonight. You need to think carefully about how." After we hung up, I poured myself a drink, but the glass trembled in my hand. The whiskey sloshed onto the table. I left it there. I walked through the house, touching the things Douglas had once bought, the life he'd built on deceit. The leather chair in his study, the framed family photos he'd arranged so perfectly, all of it felt like a museum of lies. And then I saw it. On the mantel, one of the photos had shifted in its frame. It was a picture of Daniel at age 6, sitting on his father's lap. But tucked behind it, hidden by the frame, was another photo. one I didn't remember taking. A baby girl, wrapped in a hospital blanket, on the back, written in Douglas's handwriting, "She'll never know." That night, I tore every photo of him off the walls. By morning, the house was silent except for the sound of my heartbeat. Douglas was gone, but his sin was alive, and it was about to destroy everything he'd left behind. For 3 days, I couldn't move forward. The proof lay spread across my kitchen table. The letter, the forged signature, the DNA results. I'd stare at them until the words blurred, then start reading again as if repetition could make sense of it. Every document was a wound. I told myself that Clara was innocent, that she couldn't possibly have known. But the human heart doesn't care about logic. It only feels the sting of what's lost. She'd walked into my life wearing the face I used to have, unknowingly carrying the sin of the man who'd broken me. On the 4th day, I called Stephen. "I need to talk to her," I said. He hesitated. "If you tell her the truth, everything changes. Your son, her life, your family's reputation." "Reputation died the day he took her from me," I said flatly. He didn't argue. "Then we do it carefully. I'll be nearby." I asked Clara to meet me at a cafe. I told her I wanted to make peace, that I'd been unfairly cold to her. She agreed right away, sweet and trusting. When she arrived, she was wearing a cream sweater and a gold necklace. My necklace. The one I'd lost years ago. She smiled as she sat down. "Daniel said you wanted to talk. I'm glad. I didn't want you to think I'm trying to replace anyone." I forced a smile. "You remind me of someone I used to know, someone I lost." She tilted her head, eyes curious. "Maybe that's why we get along. I've always felt familiar around you." Her words cracked something open inside me. My throat tightened, and before I could stop myself, I asked, "Clara, do you know much about your parents?" Her smile faltered. "Not really. I was adopted. They died in a car accident when I was 19. I don't remember much before them." "What about before the adoption?" She looked down, fidgeting with her necklace. "I don't know. The agency told me it was sealed. Sometimes I think about it, though. I wonder if they loved me." My voice broke. "I'm sure they did." Her eyes lifted to mine. "You sound like you know." I wanted to tell her then and there, to pull her into my arms and say the words that had been clawing inside me since I saw her face. But when I opened my mouth, I saw Daniel through the cafe window, smiling as he walked toward us, bouquet in hand. The truth died on my tongue. He kissed her forehead, waved at me, cheerful and oblivious. "Hey, Mom, I didn't know you two were meeting." "Just getting to know each other," I said softly. He grinned. "Good, you'll be seeing a lot more of her. We're moving the wedding up. June." I froze. Clara's hand slid into his. She looked happy, relieved even. "That's soon," I said, forcing the words out. "Have you done all the legal paperwork? Background checks? Marriage license?" Daniel laughed. "Mom, we're not running a company, it's a wedding." Clara giggled softly. "It's sweet that you care so much." Sweet. That's what they called it. Sweet when everything inside me screamed wrong. After they left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair where Clara had been. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air. My perfume, my past. That night, I called Stephen again. "We have to stop this wedding." "I understand," he said, "but how you reveal it matters. If Daniel hears it from you without proof he can process, he'll think it's another obsession. We'll need the official court documentation unsealed." "Can you do that?" "It'll take time. Maybe a few weeks." "Then we don't have time," I said bitterly, "because in a few weeks they'll be married." He sighed. "Then you have to make her remember. Sometimes memory hides more than paper ever could." I didn't sleep. I dug out every old photo, every scrap of my past. I compared them to Clara's pictures from social media. Same birthmark on the collarbone, same slight tilt of the head when smiling, same left-handedness. There was no doubt. By dawn, I sat at the kitchen table with a letter in front of me written in shaking ink. Clara, you don't know me the way you should, but you know me in every way that matters. I am not your enemy. I am your beginning. Please meet me tomorrow. Come alone. I folded it, slipped it into an envelope, and drove across town. The morning light was pale, cold. I slid the letter under her apartment door and walked away before I could lose my nerve. The next day she came. She stood on my porch, nervous but calm. You said this was important. It is, I whispered. Come inside. We sat at the table, the evidence spread out before us. I didn't speak. I just pushed the documents toward her. Birth certificate, DNA results, hospital letter. She looked at them, then at me. What is this? The truth. When she saw my name printed under Mother, her breath caught. Her hands shook as she lifted the paper closer, eyes darting between my name and her own. This can't be real, she whispered. It's some mistake. It's not. My voice was barely a whisper. I lost you before I ever knew I had you. Your father, Douglas Parker, made sure of it. She stared at me for a long time, then pushed the papers away as tears welled in her eyes. Daniel, he's my... Yes. The words shattered her. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the chair. No, this can't. He loves me. Her voice broke. I rose too, reaching for her, but she backed away like I was poison. Get away from me. The door slammed so hard it rattled the glass. I stood in the silence, my heart aching for the daughter I'd found, and lost again. Outside, the wind howled. Somewhere across town, I knew she was crying too, and the wedding invitations were still waiting to be sent. For 2 days after she ran out, I didn't hear a word. I tried calling, texting, even driving past Daniel's apartment, but no one answered. The blinds were always drawn. My son's car was there, but hers wasn't. On the 3rd day, I woke to pounding on my front door. Daniel stood there, face tight, eyes burning. What the hell did you say to her, Mom? The sound of his voice, rage layered over heartbreak, made me tremble. Daniel, please come inside. He shoved past me. No, tell me right here. Clara hasn't slept, hasn't eaten. She says you told her some disgusting lie. It wasn't a lie, I whispered. He laughed, sharp and bitter. You're really doing this? You're trying to destroy her because she reminds you of yourself? Because you can't stand that I'm happy? That's not... He slammed his hand against the wall. You've always been dramatic. But this is sick. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him see. Instead, I handed him the envelope Stephen had given me. Read this. He glanced at it, jaw tightening. No, I'm done entertaining your delusions. It's not a delusion, I said, voice breaking. It's your life, Daniel. Your father took something from me, something from you, and it's standing right beside you, wearing a white dress. He froze. What are you talking about? Clara, I whispered. She's your sister. The color drained from his face. Stop it. Daniel, please. I have the papers. I didn't believe it either at first, but it's true. Your father forged my signature, gave her up for adoption. Enough, he shouted. You're lying. You hate him, and now you're dragging her into it because you can't let him go. I tried to reach for him, but he stepped back. You need help, Mom. Real help. And then he was gone. The door slammed, and the silence that followed was unbearable. That night, I sat by the window with the lights off, staring out at the lake. My reflection in the glass looked like someone else, a ghost of the woman I used to be. Somewhere out there, my son was breaking apart, and my daughter was drowning in guilt for something she hadn't even done. I called Stephen. He won't believe me. I figured as much, he said quietly. Denial is easier than truth, but we're not done yet. What do you mean? I got access to the sealed adoption testimony. There's a recording, your husband's voice. He admitted arranging the transfer. My breath caught. A recording? Yes. The agency kept copies of verbal authorizations for legal reasons. It's on tape. When can I hear it? Tomorrow morning. Come by my office. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark until dawn, replaying Daniel's face over and over. I wanted to believe love would guide him back to me, but the truth is love doesn't always survive betrayal. It fractures like glass, sharp and dangerous. When I arrived at Stephen's office, he was waiting with an old cassette player. He pressed play. A voice filled the room, smooth, confident, unmistakably Douglas's. Yes, I'm the father. The mother doesn't need to know. She's unstable. Just handle the paperwork quietly. It's for the best. Then silence. I felt my stomach twist. That single sentence had destroyed 30 years of lives. Stephen leaned forward. This is your leverage. If he was still alive, he'd be charged with fraud. But it's enough to prove your story. Daniel can't deny this. Send me a copy, I said. My voice was calm, but my hands trembled. I'll handle the rest. That evening, as the sun went down, I drove to Daniel's apartment. The wedding was less than a week away. Clara answered the door. Her face was pale, eyes red from crying. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Please, I said softly, just hear me out. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Daniel was sitting on the couch, shoulders slumped, an unopened bottle of champagne on the table. You have 5 minutes, he said coldly. I took a deep breath and set the cassette player down. This isn't about me or Clara. This is about what he did to us. I pressed play. Douglas's voice filled the room again. The words echoed off the walls like a curse. When it ended, Clara covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing. Daniel just stared, motionless. After what felt like an eternity, he whispered, "That's him." "Yes," I said, "that's your father." Clara looked up, trembling. "He stole me." Daniel turned toward her, horror dawning in his eyes. No, that can't." "It's true," I said quietly. "You were born minutes apart. He took her while I was sedated." Daniel buried his face in his hands. "Oh, God." The sound that came out of Clara wasn't a sob. It was a broken gasp, like she couldn't find enough air. She stood, backed into the wall, shaking her head. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't." "I know," I said, stepping closer. "You didn't choose this." Daniel looked up at me, eyes hollow. "What do we do now?" "End it," I said, "before it destroys you both." The wedding was canceled 2 days later. There was no public announcement, no explanations. The invitations were torn up, the venue refunded. I watched from the window as Daniel loaded boxes into his car. He didn't look back at me. Clara moved out the same night. She left a note on my doorstep. "I need time. Please don't look for me." I folded it carefully and kept it in my dresser drawer next to the ultrasound photo from 1993, the one that showed 2 heartbeats, one lost, one found, both broken. But I wasn't finished, because Douglas's sins didn't end with that adoption. And as I stared at his old files that night, I found something that made my blood run cold all over again. The folder I found buried in the bottom of Douglas's desk drawer was labeled Trust Accounts. Nothing unusual for a man who built his fortune on real estate and manipulation. But inside the folder were copies of checks, life insurance policies, and bank transfers, most made out to names I didn't recognize. At first I thought it was more of his financial scheming. He'd been clever about hiding money even during our marriage. But as I scanned the papers under the lamplight, one name froze me mid-breath. Wallace, Dr. Edward, the obstetrician who delivered my children. There were regular payments, monthly, over 2 years, starting right after the twins' birth. Each check memo said the same thing. For services rendered. Confidentiality. My stomach turned. It wasn't just a lie. It was a transaction. My daughter's disappearance had been bought and paid for. I spent hours combing through the folder. There were other names, too. Nurses, an attorney, even someone from the adoption agency. Douglas had paid them all. He hadn't hidden his crime, he'd funded it like a business venture. I didn't sleep that night. The realization pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. The man I once loved had built his entire empire on the back of deceit, forged documents, and blood money, and even dead, he was still destroying what was left of us. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I called Stephen. There's more. I found payments, proof he bribed the doctor and agency. He was quiet for a long moment. If that's true, this isn't just a family secret. It's criminal conspiracy. I don't care about the law anymore, I said. I care about making it stop. Then we make it public, he said finally. But Evelyn, once you open that door, you can't close it again. I don't intend to. That afternoon, I went to the hospital. The same sterile corridors, the same faint smell of disinfectant, the same nurse's station where I'd once been told to rest. Mrs. Parker, everything's fine. I asked to speak with Dr. Wallace. The receptionist frowned. He retired years ago, ma'am. He's in assisted living now. Where? She hesitated, glancing toward the supervisor's desk. I'm not supposed to give that information. I slid one of the photocopied checks across the counter. Tell him it's about this. Her eyes widened. 5 minutes later, she handed me an address. The care home sat on the outskirts of town, quiet and sunlit, the kind of place built to look peaceful enough to hide guilt. Dr. Wallace was frail but lucid, his hands trembling around a cup of tea. When I introduced myself, he flinched like I'd come back from the dead. Mrs. Parker, he said slowly, I always wondered if this day would come. You remember me? I said flatly. How could I forget? Then you know why I'm here. He sighed, eyes darting toward the window. Your husband was persuasive. He said it was for the child's safety. She was healthy, I snapped. You stole her from me. His voice wavered. I didn't steal her. I followed orders. You took money. He didn't deny it. He said you were unstable. He said one child was enough, that you'd never recover if you knew there were two. I was wrong to believe him. My hands shook. You ruined her life. You ruined our lives. He lowered his gaze. If it means anything now, I'm sorry. It doesn't, I said. Before I left, I slid a copy of the payment record onto his tray. You'll have to answer for this. That night, Stephen and I met at his office. I handed him the folder. He admitted it. Every payment, every signature. Stephen nodded grimly. This gives us leverage if Daniel decides to deny the truth again. It's irrefutable. I'm not doing this for leverage, I said. I'm doing this because my husband turned my children into victims, and I'm done letting him win. Stephen watched me carefully. There's something else, isn't there? I hesitated. Yes, Douglas's will. He left everything to Daniel. But I found a codicil, a handwritten note attached. It says, in the event both children are reunited, divide equally. Stephen's brows rose. He knew she'd come back. He planned for it. I swallowed hard. It wasn't guilt, it was control. Even in death, he wanted to dictate how we'd find each other. The next morning, I mailed copies of every document, the adoption papers, the financial records, the doctor's confession, to Clara. No letter, no explanation, just the truth. 2 days later, she showed up at my door again. Her eyes were red, her voice raw. You sent them to me. I did. She stepped inside, shaking. He bought me, like property, and I lived my whole life thinking I was lucky to be loved. You were innocent, I said softly. None of this was your fault. She looked up at me, tears streaking her cheeks. I thought I'd hate you, but I don't. I hate him. I took her hands, hesitant, fragile. You don't have to hate anyone. Just don't let his lies define you. She nodded slowly, but I saw something burning in her eyes, a mixture of grief and resolve. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. We need to tell Daniel. Together. The next morning we did. Daniel opened the door, stunned to see us side by side. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he whispered, "You came back." Clara nodded, voice trembling. "I had to. You deserve the truth from me, not from a piece of paper." We sat in his living room, the air thick with silence. Clara spoke first, halting, honest, brave. She told him everything: the adoption, the bribes, the lies. Daniel didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was barely audible. "I thought I'd never forgive her," he said, looking at me. "But it wasn't her sin, it was his." He looked at Clara, tears in his eyes. "You're my sister." She nodded, sobbing. He reached for her hand, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something like healing flicker between them. But I also knew we weren't done. Not yet, because Douglas's crimes might have been buried for 30 years, but I wasn't going to let them stay buried any longer, not when there were others he'd hurt, and I was about to find out just how deep his rot went. The air in Daniel's apartment that night was heavy, suffocating, the kind of silence that follows a storm but doesn't feel like peace. When Clara left to get some air, Daniel stayed sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring into nothing. "He really did all that," he said quietly, voice hollow. I nodded. Every last detail. He forged, bribed, and buried the truth. Daniel laughed under his breath, a broken sound. "I spent years idolizing that man. I wore his suits. I used his name to get into rooms I didn't belong in. And now—" He trailed off, rubbing his face with both hands. "I wanted to hold him, to tell him he wasn't responsible for his father's sins. But there are some truths that build walls between people, not bridges. I'm not sure I know who I am anymore," he whispered. "You're still my son," I said softly. "That's the one thing he can't take from us." He looked up, eyes red, and nodded once. "Then we burn what's left of his lies." 2 days later, we drove to the old Parker estate. It had been abandoned since Douglas's death, left to rot under ivy and silence. The gate creaked open like it was groaning in protest. Dust and old wood filled the air. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it. His desk immaculate, his leather chair turned toward the window as though he'd only stepped out for a moment. The smell of stale cologne still lingered. Daniel ran his hand along the edge of the mahogany desk. He used to sit here for hours pretending he was working. Guess he was on his next deception. I found the safe behind the painting where it had always been. The code came to me without thought. 043, our wedding anniversary. It clicked open with an almost mocking ease. Inside were files, photographs, deeds, decades of paperwork. But beneath them, folded carefully, was a sealed envelope addressed to Evelyn. My name. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. The handwriting was his, sharp, deliberate, the same way he'd written notes on Daniel's report cards, the same way he'd signed his lies. "If you're reading this, you finally found what I built. You were always clever, Evelyn, but you never understood power. I did what I had to do for this family. You would have ruined it with your weakness. You wanted children. I gave you an heir. The other one was never meant to stay. Consider this my final gift. Truth, at last. The empire stands because I made the hard choices you couldn't." The paper crumpled in my hands. Daniel read over my shoulder, his jaw tightening. He still thinks he was right. I looked at my son, the same eyes, the same hands, and whispered, "That's what monsters tell themselves so they can sleep." We spent hours combing through the safe. Among the property deeds and business contracts were legal records, proof of offshore accounts, shell companies, falsified adoption transfers. He'd built an empire not on wealth, but on corruption. Daniel's voice trembled with anger. This could ruin everything. His name, the company, everything tied to him. "Good," I said. He glanced at me. You want to destroy him even after death? Yes, because if we don't, someone else will suffer for his lies. You saw what he did to us. How many others did he silence? Daniel exhaled slowly, then nodded. Then we expose him. Stephen arranged the meeting with the district attorney. He came to the house himself to collect the evidence. "This is enough to open a posthumous investigation," he said. "There are probably more victims tied to these accounts." "I want his name off every plaque, every building," I said. "I don't care about the money, I just want the truth on record." Stephen met my eyes. "That's what justice looks like, Evelyn. But justice isn't clean. It doesn't heal the wounds it exposes." A week later, the story broke. Local business icon accused of decades-long fraud and cover-up. My phone rang nonstop. Reporters, old acquaintances, lawyers trying to protect their own reputations. Daniel's voice on the other end of one call was quiet. "They're tearing him apart." "He earned it," I said. "I know," he whispered. I keep seeing his face. I hate him, but he's still my father." I didn't have an answer for that. Hate and love are sometimes carved from the same bone. That night, Clara came back. She looked calmer, more grounded, though her eyes still carried the weight of something broken. "I saw the news," she said. "I thought I'd feel relief, but I just feel empty." I poured her tea, my hand steady for the first time in weeks. "Healing doesn't always feel like peace, Clara. Sometimes it's just surviving the truth." She smiled faintly. "I've decided to move away for a while. I need distance. From all of this, from him, from us." I nodded. "You should, but don't disappear forever." She hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. Her embrace was soft but trembling. "I don't know how to be anyone's daughter," she whispered. "You already are," I said. "You just forgot." When she left, the house felt both heavier and lighter. I stood by the window, watching her car disappear down the driveway, and realized something that startled me. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. Douglas's house, once a monument to control, now felt like what it truly was, a tomb for the lies he built. But one thing still lingered. A letter Stephen found in a sealed drawer after the DA search, a letter not addressed to me. It was addressed to Clara, and it began, "If you're reading this, my darling girl." When Stephen handed me the letter, it was sealed in a thick ivory envelope, the paper yellowed with age. The handwriting was unmistakable. Douglas's, bold and careful, each letter a performance of control. "I thought you'd want to give it to her yourself," Stephen said quietly. I took it, but my fingers went cold around the edges. "You read it." He shook his head. "I wouldn't. It's hers. But Evelyn, whatever's inside, it's going to reopen wounds. Are you sure you want her to see it?" I stared down at my husband's name written in black ink, the final piece of his manipulation reaching out from the grave. "If she doesn't see it," I said, "then he still wins." It took 3 days before I could bring myself to drive to Clara's apartment. She just started a new job at an art gallery in the city. When she opened the door, she looked different, stronger somehow. But when she saw the envelope in my hand, her expression hardened. "What is that?" "A letter. From him. To you." She stared at it like it might bite her. "I don't want anything from that man." "I don't blame you, but you deserve to know what he tried to say." Her voice was quiet. "What if it ruins the little bit of peace I've built?" "Then at least it'll be ruined by truth," I said. "Not by what-ifs." She took it reluctantly, her fingers brushing mine. "Will you stay while I read it?" "Yes." We sat in her small kitchen. She opened the envelope slowly, as if unwrapping a wound. The paper inside was brittle, lined with Douglas's neat, almost theatrical handwriting. She read it aloud. "My darling girl, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I never meant for you to live without knowing where you came from. You were my second chance. Your mother wouldn't have understood. She was fragile, too soft for the world I was building. I had to protect you both in my own way. I watched you grow up from afar. You were brilliant, radiant, everything I wanted to preserve. Daniel inherited my name, but you were the one who inherited my mind. When the time was right, I arranged for paths to cross. Fate doesn't happen by accident. If it comforts you, know that nothing you feel is wrong. You were meant to come home. Douglas. The letter slipped from her hand, fluttering onto the table like something diseased. I could barely speak. He orchestrated it, I whispered. Even her meeting Daniel. It wasn't chance. Clara's face had gone pale. He made me fall in love with my brother. The words hung in the air like poison. She stood up abruptly, pacing. He wanted this. He wanted to prove he could control everything, even our hearts. Tears burned behind my eyes. He didn't love anyone, Clara. Not you, not Daniel, not me. He loved power. She slammed her hand against the counter. Then why do I still feel sorry for him? Why do I keep asking myself if any part of it was real? I crossed the room, took her trembling hands. Because you have something he never did. Empathy. It's not weakness, Clara. It's what makes you human. She pressed her forehead against mine, sobbing. He stole my past. He doesn't get my future. That night, she handed me the letter back. Burn it, she said. He doesn't get to speak anymore. So we did. We stood behind her apartment building, the city humming faintly around us, and watched the flames devour his words. The paper curled and blackened until nothing was left but ash and smoke. He thought he could play God, I said softly. Clara nodded. Then let this be his final miracle, turning to dust. When the last ember faded, we both exhaled. Something unspoken passed between us, grief, relief, and the faintest hint of rebirth. Over the next few weeks, Clara threw herself into work. She started a support group for adoptees trying to reconnect with lost family. She called it Project Renewal. I helped her draft the mission statement. Daniel joined us after a while. The first meeting was awkward. 3 people bound by blood and betrayal. But when I saw them talking quietly by the window, I realized something. Pain doesn't have to end in distance. Sometimes it becomes purpose. Still, the ghost of Douglas lingered. One afternoon, I got a call from Stephen. Evelyn, the DA's investigation uncovered something else. Your husband had a second offshore account, under Clara's name. It's worth millions. My heart skipped. He left her money? Yes. And there's a note attached to the account access for the one I loved enough to steal. I went silent. Stephen cleared his throat. It's legally hers. She can do whatever she wants with it. After I hung up, I called Clara. When I told her, she didn't say a word for a long time. Then finally, I'll donate it. Every cent. Let his poison fund something good. Are you sure? Yes, she said firmly. He stole a life. Maybe now it can save others. A month later, we stood together at a small charity gala, the launch of the Douglas Parker Foundation for Lost Children. Not to honor him, but to expose what he'd done. His name would never again mean success. It would mean accountability. Clara gave a speech. Her voice was steady, resolute. I was born from lies, but I choose to live in truth. My father took my name, my mother, my choices, but he didn't take my will. This foundation is for every child who was silenced by someone else's power. You are not lost. You are found. The crowd applauded, and for the first time in decades, I felt something inside me unclench. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I found Clara sitting alone on the stage, staring at the empty chairs. "Do you think he'd hate what we've done?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "He'd hate that he doesn't control it." She smiled faintly. Good. We sat together in silence, and for the first time since the nightmare began, the silence felt clean. Still, in the quiet corners of my mind, one thought kept echoing. He orchestrated everything. And if Douglas had planned that much, what else had he left behind that we hadn't yet found? It was early winter when the final ghost of Douglas Parker revealed itself. The first snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the town in white, a cruel irony given how dirty his legacy still felt. I was in my living room sorting through old boxes. The district attorney's office had returned after closing the investigation. The case was over, his reputation stripped bare, his accounts liquidated into restitution funds. But the man had been a builder. He never created anything without a blueprint, and I had a feeling there was still one left. At the bottom of the last box, I found it, a leather-bound notebook, thin, marked DP in embossed gold. My stomach turned as I opened it. Inside were diagrams, charts, lines connecting names I didn't recognize: lawyers, doctors, adoption agencies, real estate trusts, each name linked to a date, a dollar amount, and a code. It wasn't just a record of crimes, it was a network. Page after page detailed reallocation projects, asset transfers, offspring strategies. The phrasing chilled me. Offspring strategies. It wasn't just about Clara and Daniel. He had sponsored at least 6 other placements through the same shady agency that had handled Clara's adoption. 6 children, 6 families, and in the center of the web he'd drawn on the final page, one name was circled in red ink: Project Legacy. At the bottom of that page was a single line written in his precise, arrogant hand: "Blood is the only investment that never depreciates." I closed the notebook slowly, hands trembling. Even in death, Douglas hadn't stopped playing God. That evening, I called Stephen. My voice was tight, shaking. He didn't just steal Clara, he sold other children. I have proof, records, payments, names. Stephen was silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone hard. "You're saying he ran an illegal adoption ring?" "Yes, and he documented it like an accountant balancing a checkbook." "Evelyn, if this is what it sounds like, it could reopen everything. The case, the foundation, even Clara's healing." "I don't care," I said. "Those other children deserve to know who they are." By the next morning, the files were in the hands of the DA's team. Clara and Daniel came to my house when they heard. Daniel's face was pale. "You found more?" I handed him the notebook. "Read it." He did silently, flipping through the pages. Each turn of paper seemed to drain the color from his face. "He cataloged people like property," he whispered. Clara stood beside him, tears brimming. "How many lives did he ruin?" "Too many," I said, "but now we can undo at least part of it." Clara brushed her hair back, steadying herself. "We find them, every one of them. We tell them the truth. It's the only way to bury him properly." Over the next months, Project Legacy became something else, a mission of reclamation. The DA traced 5 of the 6 missing children through falsified birth certificates and agency ledgers. 3 were alive, living under false records. 2 had died young, one in foster care, one in a hospital that had long since been demolished. When I told Clara, she cried for all of them, as if their loss was her own. Maybe it was. I met one of the survivors, a woman named Grace, in a coffee shop in Ohio. She was 40 now, adopted by a family who had no idea she'd been taken illegally. When I explained how she'd been part of Douglas's scheme, she stared at me for a long time and said, "So, he thought he was saving me? He made me an exhibit." "He didn't save anyone," I told her. "He collected you." One afternoon, Stephen came by with new findings. "There's something else, Evelyn," he said, setting a flash drive on my desk. "Blueprints for offshore trusts tied to those children." He left inheritance accounts for each of them, hidden under false guardianship clauses. Why? I asked, exhausted. Why create victims, then reward them after his death? Stephen shrugged. Maybe he wanted them indebted to him forever. Maybe he thought if they discovered the truth, they'd see him as their benefactor, not their abuser. He underestimated his bloodline, I said bitterly. None of us worship him anymore. By spring, our foundation had shifted focus. Clara renamed it the Renewal Project, turning Douglas's empire inside out. Where he had trafficked in silence, we built in confession. Where he'd written contracts, we wrote healing grants. Every stolen file we found became a lifeline for someone. And yet, there were nights when I still woke up drenched in sweat, hearing his voice in the dark. You were never strong enough to lead. I'd whisper back into the empty room, I'm leading now. Daniel started therapy. Clara began writing a book about her story. The world, in its strange way, began to listen. Our faces were on talk shows, our words printed in magazines. People called us survivors. But survival, I learned, doesn't mean you're unscarred. It means you learned how to walk with ghosts. One evening, after a long day of interviews, Clara came to my porch. The light was soft, the air full of crickets. She handed me an envelope. This was in one of the storage boxes from his office. It's for you. I frowned, opening it slowly. Inside was a single photograph. Me, Douglas, and the twins in the hospital room. I was unconscious, eyes closed. Douglas smiled for the camera, holding one baby while the nurse held the other. On the back, written in his familiar hand, even perfection can be edited. I let out a shaky laugh, equal parts rage and grief. He documented his cruelty like art. Clara's jaw tightened. Then we'll make sure it's the last photo of him anyone ever sees. That night, I burned the photograph in the fireplace. As the flames licked the edges, I whispered, You don't own us anymore. Douglas's ashes had long been scattered, but as the smoke rose, I imagined it was the last piece of him leaving this world. The next morning, the headline on the local paper read, Renewal Project Traces, Decades of Stolen Lives, Families Reunited, after 30 years. I folded the paper, smiled faintly, and whispered to the empty house, This is what legacy really looks like. But deep down, I knew our story wasn't quite finished. Because monsters like Douglas Parker never just vanish, they leave echoes. And somewhere, buried in the maze of his lies, one final echo was still waiting to be heard. It started with a letter that wasn't supposed to reach me. The return address said St. Jude Correctional Facility, and the sender's name, Edward Wallace. My pulse quickened. The same Dr. Wallace who'd helped Douglas steal my child 30 years ago. I'd testified against him. He'd been sentenced to 5 years for falsifying medical records and obstructing justice. I sat at my kitchen table for almost an hour before opening it. Mrs. Parker, I have little left to lose. The guilt is heavier than the years I've served. Your husband's schemes went deeper than you or I ever knew. I wasn't his only accomplice. After the adoption, he ordered that your medical files and the hospital records be cleansed. I thought that meant archived. I was wrong. He had them destroyed, except one copy. That copy wasn't in his possession when he died. It was sent to someone named MP. He said, if Evelyn ever finds out, MP will know what to do. I don't know who MP is, but the initials were written in his will under contingency. Find that person, and you'll find the last piece of his secret. May God forgive me, Dr. Edward Wallace. The paper trembled in my hand. The ink had bled slightly at the edges, like tears dried too fast. I whispered the initials over and over. MP. My first thought was a relative. My second, something worse. When I called Stephen, he didn't sound surprised. Douglas always kept layers to his lies. MP could be anyone, an alias, a company, even someone he mentored. Then we find them, I said. before they find us. It didn't take long. Stephen's investigator traced a trust company in Delaware, Marston and Pierce Holdings, registered just months before Douglas's death. Its founder, Marion Pierce. When he showed me her photo, my skin crawled. She was young, mid-30s, poised, immaculate, and her eyes, they were Douglas's eyes. A quick DNA test confirmed it. Another daughter. One he'd fathered after our divorce, likely through an affair. She'd grown up under his protection, his money, his training, and now she controlled what was left of his hidden assets. Stephen looked grim. She's his successor, Evelyn. He built her to continue what he started. I couldn't breathe. You're saying he made another me? Not like you, Stephen said. She doesn't question him. She worships him. A week later, Marion called. Her voice was smooth, confident, eerily familiar. "Mrs. Parker," she said, "you've made quite a mess of my father's legacy. I think it's time we talked." We met at the Parker estate, the same house where it all began. She arrived in a tailored black suit, the same perfume Douglas used to buy me. When she extended her hand, I saw the faint scar on her wrist, the same place I'd once had mine stitched after childbirth. "You look like him," I said quietly. "I take that as a compliment," she replied, smiling. It wasn't one. She laughed softly. "You think you destroyed him, but you didn't. You've just made him immortal. Every news story, every headline, you turned him into a myth, and myths don't die." My voice trembled, but I stood tall. He wasn't a myth. He was a thief who built his empire on children's lives. "And you're building yours on his ashes," she said coldly. "You took his money to start your precious foundation. You speak his name every day. You're still serving him. You just don't see it." Her words stung because there was a sliver of truth buried in them. "What do you want?" I asked. "Balance," she said simply. "You burned his name. I'll rebuild it." She handed me an envelope before walking away. Inside was a single card embossed with gold lettering. Douglas Parker Institute for Legacy Research Director, Marion Pierce. I stared at the card until the letters blurred. His blood, his lies, his legacy, reborn again. That night, I sat in the dark, listening to the winter wind press against the glass. Douglas had always said, "You can't kill an idea," but I wasn't going to let his idea live in her hands. Because if he'd built her to continue his legacy, then I would become the one thing he could never control, his undoing. And this time, it would end for good. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I reread every letter, every file, every line of his cursed handwriting, and the more I read, the more I realized. Douglas hadn't created Marion to love him. He'd created her to protect his truth from me. He'd known I would find him out one day, and he'd left behind a failsafe, a daughter molded in his image to defend the myth of Douglas Parker visionary. So I made a decision. I wouldn't fight her in court. I'd fight her in the light. 3 weeks later, the Renewal Project hosted a national conference on ethical reform in adoption and family law. Politicians, activists, journalists, all gathered in one place. Clara was to give the keynote speech, but I had another presentation planned. Halfway through the evening, when the cameras were live and the lights dimmed, I took the stage. Clara's eyes widened in confusion as I carried a small black folder, the same one from the estate safe. "My name is Evelyn Parker," I began. My voice echoed through the auditorium, steady but sharp. "For 30 years, my family lived under the shadow of a man who believed control was love and lies were protection. His name was Douglas Parker. Tonight, I want to show you what that legacy really looked like." The projector flickered to life. One by one, the images appeared. Forged adoption records, bank transfers, hospital memos, even the doctor's signed confession. Gasps rippled through the audience. "This," I continued, "is what happens when power becomes a god. But his empire doesn't end with him. It still breathes in boardrooms, in offshore accounts, in foundations that claim to preserve his vision. I paused. One of those is the Douglas Parker Institute for Legacy Research, led by a woman named Marion Pierce. She calls him her father. She claims to continue his work, and I say, no more. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. Somewhere in the audience, I saw Marion rise from her seat, her face pale but defiant. "You can't destroy him," she shouted. I met her eyes. "Watch me." By the time the speech ended, the story had already hit national news. Within 24 hours, Marion's Institute was under investigation. The public turned, sponsors withdrew, donors vanished. The Parker name became a warning, not a legacy, and for the first time, I felt the weight of 30 years begin to lift. Weeks later, I stood at Douglas's grave. The ground was frozen, the headstone simple and unmarked, by choice. I placed a single photograph on the soil, me, Clara, and Daniel, taken at the first Renewal Project event. 3 survivors, 3 names he couldn't control. "I thought revenge would feel louder," I whispered, "but it feels like quiet peace." The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard his voice. Soft, amused. "You were never strong enough to lead." I smiled faintly. "And yet, here I am." I turned and walked away. The Renewal Project continued to grow. Clara's book became a bestseller. Daniel began mentoring children who had survived adoption fraud. The foundation received federal recognition for exposing systemic corruption in family law. And me, I finally slept through the night, because the truth had won. Douglas Parker's empire of control had ended where it began, in family. Broken, yes, but real. He thought he could build forever on lies. But legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who stands up after you're gone and says, "No more."